Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And I'm thrilled because today on the line, I have Liam Martin, all the way from Ottawa, Canada. I didn't double check that fact before we started. Is it Ottawa?
It is Ottawa,
Okay,
actually.
good. Phew.
Yeah.
Read your bio correctly. You're the co-founder and CEO of both Time Doctor and Staff.com. So that's exciting. I'm a tool junkie, so we're going to dive into that, what that does. You're also the co-organizer of Running Remote Conference, which is happening the 29th and 30th of June 2019, depending on when you're listening to this. It's in Bali, and we're gonna dive into that too, because I'm very excited about your conference. But let's start with the first question, which is, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. So we have about 100 people in 32 different countries all over the world. And we've gone through an interesting evolution of the way that we structure both our individual kind of focus spaces and then also how we collaborate between each other. So for me, I mean, some of the tools that I just can't live without are Zoom, Slack. We still use Skype to a large degree. Google Apps for business is really big for me. Even just looking at smaller little things like I don't have them on right now, but the Bose earbuds are an absolutely amazing tool that I use every single day because they've got a fantastic microphone. You can take them with you wherever you go. LastPass, Basecamp, Trello, Stormboard, Jing, just all of these tools are kind of like, that's our generalized technology stack. We also have very strict requirements on where we can travel and work. So as an example, a few days ago, I was in Egypt at the pyramids, and we need a minimum of 5 up and 10 down on our internet to be able to actually work from that location. Otherwise, we're on vacation. So so everyone, when you get into a new location, you have to send a speed test URL. So if you just go to speedtest.net and then you click go and you basically process out your internet connection, then you send that URL back to HR. And then if you are below those requirements, you're on vacation, you basically have to find a connection that works. Our philosophy is, and our mission statement as a company is that we want everyone on planet Earth to be able to work wherever they want, whenever they want. So we're trying to facilitate that type of activity, but we recognize that there are some strict requirements, like you need to actually be able to do video calls. And you can't do video calls below 5 up. Unfortunately, it's too unstable and it doesn't necessarily work. Some people will argue you need 2 megabits per second up, and you can accomplish a call, but you just can't do the video version of a call, which is what we also require inside of all of our procedures when we do meetings with people. So it really kind of just boils down to that stuff.
Why do you require video?
We believe that it's a higher level of communication. So I kind of have the hierarchy of communication in my own mind, which is in-person beats video, video beats audio, audio beats instant messaging, and instant messaging beats email. So if you can go higher up in that chain, you will usually get your problem solved faster, which will be more efficient. So an in-person meeting is obviously more efficient than a video call, and with some kind of caveats disconnected from that. But then even when we interact on video, which is the primary way that we interact with each other, if you compare that to audio, if I asked you to be able to do something that you didn't necessarily want to do, like, can you please edit my 10,000 page blog post? And I'm a horrible writer, as an example. You might say on audio, okay, sure. But then on video, I could see non-verbally that you're not very happy about that and that I could address that at that point. So there's more richness in the communication when you have different senses basically activated.
And do you ever have people who refuse to turn the video on?
Yes, so that is voluntary. However, we also have we've only had one person that has actually had that problem. And they're still with us. They still communicate through audio. don't necessarily want to get into the details of that particular person's issue, but it was something that we don't necessarily have a problem with that person continuing on with audio. We understand the reasoning behind it. But generally, when we look at our company culture, when we initially do our recruitment process, that's one of the things that we look for. So if you're not doing a video call with us during the interview, probably you're not going to continue on through the interview process towards the end.
Right. So, and I'm really curious. So you have this long list of tools, and I have two questions about the tools. One is, what do you use Skype for?
So Skype is a very interesting tool right now when you look at Zoom, particularly for salespeople. A lot of people will still say, well, here's my Skype, and we'll do a meeting on Skype for sales. And development, in essence, completely exists on Slack right now, and to a degree, Zoom. We also use Google Meet quite a bit because we use Google Apps for Business, and there's such a tight integration where you can automatically have a Meet link directly inside of each meeting that you set up inside of Google Calendar. So that's pretty efficient. Zoom is actually, I mean, I can't remember what type of package we have. It's pretty expensive. We're spending hundreds of dollars a month on Zoom. And we just realized to be able to expand that out to a larger kind of team size, it would be economically unsustainable, or that cost, we wouldn't want to necessarily pay that cost versus being able to jump on Google Meet, which works great, and even Skype in some cases.
Right, which is sort of it's been around the longest and has slowly become the worst tool on the market somehow.
And it's interesting too, because we started with Skype. There was no Slack, there was no Zoom, there was no Google Meet, and we had a lot of operational procedures on Skype. And we actually did an interesting post where we looked quantifiably on the use case of Skype throughout the Time Doctor network versus Slack and versus Zoom. And we saw that Slack would overtake Zoom in February of 2019. And it looks like they're still on that trajectory. So that should be approximately the time when Skype overtakes Slack. But right now, Skype is still the most used tool for messaging and for video communication.
It's true. It is the most used, just not necessarily the best. But let's not dive into the tools. I want to dive into how you guys work at both Time Doctor and Staff.com. So it can't all be easy, right? Like, what are some of the challenges that you guys have gone through? What's hard for you guys working? Because you said you're 100% remote team on both teams, and you're all over the world. So what's hard for you guys?
I would probably say communication is always a challenge, like any other remote team. So the ability to communicate is less efficient on a remote team just in general than if everyone is on premise inside of an office. And I use this terminology started by Amir from Todoist, who also runs a completely remote team. The remote first companies versus on-premise companies. And for computer nerds like us, on-premise is what you used to do when you didn't have Amazon S3 or Microsoft Azure. You would basically build a server rack. So it would be an on-premise deployment. And 20 years ago, everyone was doing on-premise deployments. Today, no one is doing on-premise deployments. You'd be nuts to set up $100 million worth of infrastructure to be able to run your tech startup. Everyone runs on Amazon. So we're trying to connect the two to be able to say, we think the same thing with regards to labor. But the difficulties that I think we see right now is communication, definitely a big thing to overcome. A lot of psychometric testing that we do has found really interesting personality types or personality variables that are less applicable towards remote work. That's been an interesting phenomenon for us to be able to take a look at as well. And
can you share some of that information? Sorry to interrupt.
So generally the biggest and strongest signal we have is introversion. Introversion is going to predict success for remote work generally. So if you don't get your energy from other people, if you get your energy from being alone or with a very small group of people, usually you'll be very successful with remote work. I'm slightly on the extroverted scale. And that's why, as an example, I have a co-working space that I go to. I go to coffee shops, and I have a home office that I work out of as well when I travel. So that's what can feed me from a remote work perspective. But for people that are very much into the extroverted scale of the spectrum, it's actually pretty difficult. We've found, and I mean, these numbers aren't solid yet. This is us just kind of looking at the data, because we do all these interesting experiments on Time Doctor because we have so many remote workers. We've got almost 100,000 remote workers on the network right now that just log in every single day. So we kind of just say, hey, would anyone like to do psychometric testing? And then we correlate that to quit and fire data to be able to see what the lead up would be and if there's a significant kind of impact by that data. So introversion has been the biggest one on that side. And just back to communication, I mean, for us, it's just we try to meet in person as much as possible. We do one big team retreat per year, company retreat. And then we do team retreats throughout the year. So different departments basically meet up on top of that one big company retreat per year. And I think the biggest issue with regards to communication is communicating who you are, not only as an employee or as an employer. I have this document that I give to people when they start working with me, which is called Blueprint to Liam and His Weird Little Quirks. And it's 9 ideas. It's basically 9 concepts of who I am as a person. And it's very, very real, meaning some of these points are things that I wouldn't necessarily want to admit to myself, but they are the feedback of people that work with me so that they understand. It's kind of like the operating manual towards how I work. And if I was in an on-premise company, you'd probably be able to pick up on those nonverbal cues within a couple weeks. But when you work remotely, you don't have that same context. So I just lay it out for people right at the very beginning. And just sort of, what is my decision-making process? What kind of things do I value versus what kind of things do I not value? And that is a pretty good way for people to really understand who I am. And I encourage them to be able to write that same document back to me so that I know what they need as a employee or a direct report to me, so that basically I can manage that person. We've had instances where we've gone through the entire hiring process and I've sent them this document, and then they've said, you know what, I don't think we would be a really good fit working together because I'm these things and you're these things, and it looks like we're going to come into conflict. So we've actually saved hires where we'll move that person to a different department where they'll probably find more success just because they couldn't really work with me as a direct report.
Interesting. So I've heard of I've heard of and encourage teams that create team agreements together. So like they just outline how they're going to work together. And this sort of takes it to another level. It's like a personal agreement, almost like, hey, here's what it's going to be like to work with me. Here's my bluepreint to my personality in some ways.
I have point 2, decide. Decisions over options is always my preferred way of working. If you have to bring me options, tell me which option you're leaning towards. If you aren't leaning towards an option, then you haven't thought it through long enough. Basically, if you come to me with a problem without possible solutions, we probably won't be working together that long.
Right.
That's a very direct way of communicating, but there are some people that actually don't think that way. I have my thesis statement, which is at the very bottom of the document. I value decision-making above all else. I'd rather you make the wrong decision than none at all, particularly inside of remote teams, because I might have a 12-hour time zone issue where the person that, Igor, who is the general manager and co-organizer of Running Remote, he is in Bali, which is approximately 12 hours. So if he needs to make all of his own independent decisions, and then I could just reassess those decisions afterwards. He can't come to me with should I do X, Y, or Z? He should say, I had X, Y, and Z as an option. I chose Z. What do you think? That's the
Right.
right way to be able to operate, because you can't have that 12-hour delay. It's just too slow for decision making.
Indeed. So now Time Doctor and Staff.com are pretty interesting in terms of, because you're talking about hiring people and making them productive. But I'm really curious, what are your tricks for hiring yourself? Like, what do people go through to be able to work with you? How do you find remote workers who are going to be good?
Sure. So that's actually a big challenge, but it's a challenge for everybody, right? Everyone who's trying
Even
to hire right now.
co-located, right? I mean,
Yeah, everyone's got that challenge. I actually think remote makes it easier on average, because we're not just trying to hire the best React developer for $5,000 a month in Ottawa. We're trying to find the best React developer for $5,000 on planet Earth, which makes the net much bigger, but it is it is a longer HR process. So we usually, and I don't want to, there's plenty of different job boards that we post on. We post on, I think, about 25, 26 job boards whenever we have a new HR requirement to go out. But the ones that we found the most success with is We Work Remotely and Remote OK.
mm-hmm.
Those two platforms, the workers already, those job boards are specifically for remote workers and for long-term remote workers, which are the only people that we're really looking for. So Upwork has more project-based stuff. We don't want someone to come on for a project. That's actually, we lose money when we bring on people for a project, because anyone that we bring on, we need to have working on multiple projects for the future. We're hiring a position. So Remote OK and We Work Remotely is the best. Generally, we don't start a short list until we're at 200 candidates. So we have that initial group of resumes, 200. It breaks down to 20 as a short list. That initial process through recruitment is culture fit first. So sometimes people do get through the cracks, but do you like working remotely, as an example, is something that is really important. I had a meeting with a salesperson who said, oh, I can absolutely sell Time Doctor for you. No problem. Here are my numbers. Here are the different companies that I've worked at, but working remotely is dumb. Right. And I was like, okay, cool. You know what? I think we should just kind of break at that particular moment, because you obviously are not culturally connected to what we're doing. We've found that having that culture fit first before we even look at their resume. So we do not look at their qualifications until we look at their culture fit. We've also recently implemented we've kind of recognized it's a retention tool for us. So we've found there've been candidates that look amazing on paper, but we know they're not really our type of people, and they'll end up quitting, or we'll end up firing them within a year. And it happens. It was happening over and over again. And just realized that, well, maybe we should just be looking for people that we really want to get along with. People who we would say, if they were in a restaurant and you entered the restaurant, would you go up and say hello?
Interesting.
Yes, then this is probably somebody who you would want to work with long term. If you kind of like say, oh, there's John, right? And then just keep going, that's probably not somebody that you should hire.
Love it. I've heard it also described by Bree Reynolds from Flex Jobs. She said, our criteria is, would you want to spend 3 hours on a bus trip together with them? Same
Great
kind
one.
of thing.
Yeah.
Like, would you, because, anybody that's traveled on a bus,
yeah,
it better be a good partner.
Right. So, I mean, that's an interesting, so we go for that culture fit first. We've also recently been experimenting with removing any gender identification components of the resume. And that's been an interesting, we haven't finished it yet, but it looks like we're getting more female candidates that are coming in through that short list, which is funny because recruitment is run entirely by women. I think there's only one man on the team out of 5. And, but yet we were still having this bias of a lot of men making it through the short list. So by removing those variables and just looking at the culture fit first, it's been breaking that process down. So 20 candidates.
Super interesting.
We do interviews. So usually the direct report will do those 20, we'll look at those 20 resumes, probably do 10 interviews. Off of those 10 interviews, that will then lead to some type of interim small testing, which has already been done actually at the 20 candidate mark, but a deeper test. And then what we'll end up doing is we will usually hire more than one candidate for a 1-month trial. And the reason why we do this is we've recognized hiring remotely is so much cheaper than hiring on premise. So what we're doing at that point is they're all on as contractors. So we don't have to go through any of the bureaucracy of actually setting up formalized payroll or anything like that. And they both work for us. A lot of the times they don't know that the other person exists. So we say there's other candidates, but we don't connect the two of them. And then we have them do the same tasks to be able to reconfirm the resumes, because sometimes someone can look great on paper, but then when they actually boil down to execution, it's a very different machine. And we've been constantly surprised. I think our hit rate is literally 50-50, where the person we think that's going to be the best, 50% of the time we're right, 50% we're wrong. So that's been really,
which is crazy because you've spent a lot of time like vetting this person, right? You spend a lot of time in the hiring, and then it's still 50-50. And you're not the first person I've heard that from by any stretch of the imagination. I've also heard it from people hiring for Inperson. It's also 50-50 in some cases. So
it's expensive. It's actually one of those costings, like we've kind of worked it out. It probably costs us between $10,000 to $20,000 to hire a candidate. Just like the initial hiring process. It's more expensive for on-premise companies, but if we're doing 100 of those a year, that's a lot of capital that we have to outlay to be able to make that work. So for us, we're really focused on making sure that those candidates are the right person. And I have a kind of a philosophy of, I've got to work with you a little bit before I can work with you for an extended amount of time. So having that first month in there can really kind of test everyone out. And then after that, they're hired on for 3 months. They don't actually know it. They think they're hired, but they're kind of on a conditional hire. And then after that 3-month period, we bring in a meeting with the direct report, the manager, someone from HR, and then one of that person's coworkers. And we have a meeting, which is, why should we not hire this person? This is kind of the, forever hold your peace type of meeting, which is, we're just about to trigger this person on as full-time. Once we trigger this person on as full-time, there are a lot of costs that the company takes on. Everyone needs to know that we're absolutely sure that this is the right candidate. And that probably, we lose about 20% of the candidates through that process. And you would think, oh man, that really sucks. You just invested $40,000, $50,000 into training and working with that person. But long-term, when you're looking at retention and you're looking at that right person, that meeting is so critical, because we've had meetings where HR doesn't really know anything at that point, but the manager would say, yeah, this person is great. And then the coworker would say, you know what? She's really bossy, and and everyone on the team doesn't like her. And here are some negative things that I just want to discuss. Right. So those are examples of things that you can't really get the context on, and why we continue to have that meeting.
So I'm really curious, why did you started both of these companies, and they were remote from the beginning. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why?
So I had run a previous company, which was a online tutoring company. And the biggest problem that I had inside of that tutoring company was not being able to quantify the exact amount of hours that a remote worker was working for a client. And that was actually how we came up with Time Doctor, which was a time tracking tool specifically for remote workers. We just realized after the tutoring company that I had built, and my co-founder, who has been, he's been doing remote work for the past 20 years. We just liked traveling, and we liked doing things that were really, we obviously like working, but we liked traveling and working. And we realized that that lifestyle opportunity is something that you just can't get when you're in an office.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. So sort of a, yeah, sort of a, hey, you want to travel, you don't want to be stuck to one place. So
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because Rob, my co-founder, he never spent more than 3 months in a place for about 5 years. He was like a full-time, what you would now call
wow.
a digital nomad. And he now has 2 kids, and he lives in Sydney full-time. Me, on the other hand, I don't have any kids, but I do travel about 6 months out of the year. So I kind of have like a foot in both worlds. Basically, I like having a home base. I have an address. I have a place that I live in, quote unquote. But for me, travel, particularly in interesting and developing areas, is just an opportunity that very few people get.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've read Mark Twain, but I think the reason why he was such a fantastic writer, which was because in the 1800s, he traveled the world. He saw everything. And I think that travel really does make you a more kind of multifaceted individual. And it's something that just education really can't provide. It's kind of like very interactive education that's happening instantaneously. Like if you go down a sketchy road in Cairo, you might have 5 people that try to mug you, and you need to figure out how to not have that happen and move somewhere else, or you need to have your wits about you. These types of things, I've taken those types of lessons with me, and I feel it makes me a better person and a more interesting person. So it's
Yeah.
one
By
of those things I
nature,
really love doing. Yeah.
by nature, you see that problems can be solved in X, Y, and Z ways, and that these foods are also fine, and that this lifestyle is also fine, even though it's different. It just sort of inherently opens your eyes to the rest of the world.
I'm also a sociologist by training, and I think my bias is I always like to, so I don't like to go to, we were discussing this before, like I don't go on vacation. I don't think I've gone on vacation ever. I like to go to places, work out of those places, find a stable place to just do my work. And then I like to watch people and see how they're different. That's probably one of the most interesting things that I can do with my time, is just see how different people live their lives and see how they're different but equal.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Different but equal. Love it. So I want to switch gears. We're going to run out of time if I'm not careful here, but I want to switch gears because I'd like to really talk about this running remote conference that you've organized. This year, it's on the 29th and 30th of June, 2019. For people who are listening, it's in Bali, and it's an amazing lineup of speakers. But let's start with this question, which is why did you want to organize this conference?
That came from a conversation that I had with recruitment and some of our team, kind of cracking our head up against the wall saying, how do we get to 200 people from 100 people? Or how do we get to 500 people? What's the next stage for us? And we were really in uncharted territory. There's very little information. When you look at 100 plus seat remote first organizations, we're probably talking a couple hundred companies. Maybe you would have a better context for that. Remote first completely, yeah, I'm thinking definitely below 1,000 companies. So that's a very small group of companies that are doing these new interesting things, and a whole bunch of other companies want to do those things, but they don't have the information to actually make it happen. So we had an information problem. And we said to ourselves, well, if we cut this check for 100 grand and just try out the conference and we lose 100 grand, but our retention goes up by 10%, we've made it. We've made all that money back. So we said, let's give it a shot. Why not? And we were also very heavily connected to remote first companies. We have a lot of remote companies inside of our software products. So we said this is a good fit. The one thing we didn't do, however, is we didn't call it the Time Doctor Conference. It exists as its separate thing. It's called Running Remote. Last year, we actually had some of our competitors speaking at the conference, because for us, we're very passionate about trying to figure out how to build the playbook for remote work. So how do we move that conversation forward? There really was no conference on the subject. So we just said to ourselves, let's give it a shot and see what happens. It worked the first year beautifully, and we're back for a second year.
Awesome. Super awesome. So this year, was it in Bali the first year also?
Yes, it was in Ubud, Bali, which is right in the center of the country. This year, we're doing it down on the beach in Nusa Dua. And for anyone that hasn't been to Bali, it's probably one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth.
Okay, I was going to ask, why Bali?
So Bali is a remote work hub. When you poll people about where they would want to work remotely, Bali is continuously the number one destination. We also have people in Bali. Igor, who is the co-organizer and GM of the conference, is located in Bali. And we also set a higher price point, and we set a difficult location because we wanted a really good group of people. So we feel that the attendees are really what makes the conference. The speakers are just sort of like a lightning rod to create that attendee discussion. And a part of that would be not charging $100, but charging $1,000 for a ticket, is getting someone who's really focused and very committed to flying 25 hours and paying $1,000 for a ticket to be able to attend a conference like this. And that was something that we were originally very apprehensive about, but it ended up working out okay. We also made a rule, which was, if you don't manage anyone, we refund your ticket. You're not the right person to come. So if you're listening to this podcast right now and you don't have any employees, if you're an on-premise company that wants to go remote, you're invited. If you're a remote first company, you're invited. If you have no employees, you're really not going to get anything out of this conference. It's not the conference for you.
Right. So this is talking to managers and teams, and right.
Correct.
If you're a digital nomad, this might also not be your conference. I think we were saying before.
This is not for you. Yeah. There's tons of, you can go to Nomad Summit. You can go to DNX. You can go to Freedom X Fest. There are so many conferences. There's a cruise.
Yeah, the Nomad cruise. Yeah.
I saw that and I thought to myself, that looks interesting, but I'm way too busy to get on a boat for a week and a half, frankly, to be able to do that. But anyways, there's tons of fantastic stuff that you can go and check out. We don't want to compete against any of those people. That's not who we are. We're basically just a whole bunch of HR nerds that really want to talk about building remote teams.
It's good to know your audience. That's for sure. I have the same.
Yes.
Like, this podcast is not about digital nomads. It does get referenced because it's one of the benefits of working remotely. So
there's an interesting phenomenon with regards to digital nomads that we picked up from last year. We polled our customers and we asked them, how many of you employ digital nomads inside of your organizations? And I think we cumulatively had inside of the entire group something like 50,000 polled people that were represented, that were remote company or remote employees. And the numbers came out to about 5%. So for every digital nomad you see, there's like 20 remote workers sitting behind that digital nomad. And actually, that's probably an overrepresented sample, because remote first companies would hire digital nomads more than an on-premise company. So
right.
Maybe it's higher, but that's the only data point that I have. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. I thought it would have been significantly higher, because you see the digital nomad community, it's just so active and so open. But I think in reality, it is for people that don't have children, and people that just want to adventure, right? Like 20-somethings that just want to adventure, that have this fantastic lifestyle. It's amazing. But if you've got 2 kids and
a mortgage,
it's a little bit more difficult to be a digital nomad.
That's for sure. There is a stereotype there. It for sure does not include everybody or describe everybody, of course, but yeah.
And I also don't want to say, I'm not saying anything bad about digital nomads. I'm just telling you, because I don't want to get any hate from people, but my feeling is for digital nomadism to evolve to the next level, you have to actually solve a bunch of really problematic, bureaucratic issues that exist inside of that system, like Remote Year, who is it's a company that basically allows you to work remotely for an entire year. They have tutors inside of their program. So you can take your kids and you can, every 3 months, you have a tutor, and then the school starts in the next location so that you can bring your kids on that remote year. These are problems that I think need to be solved because, kids need to be parented and educated, and we just don't have that type of stuff that exists in the digital nomad world right now.
Right. Or, people who are, you've got maybe digital citizenship in Estonia, but your company is set up in Portugal, but you're working, from 20 different countries throughout the year. Like, where do you pay taxes? Where do you, there's all kinds of things that still need to be solved. I mean, even here in the Netherlands, what I'm doing here was not recognized necessarily by the Dutch government, because I can, my income comes from all over the world. Like, my taxes look very strange to people because it's just coming in from every known country. So,
I would probably say Estonia right now, not just the e-residency, but the e-corporate program, which gets spoken about a lot less, but they have 10% corporate tax rate that you pay to Estonia, right? Very small little tiny country. All your banking, everything is digital. It's incredibly easy to implement. We've had them as partners from the very beginning at Running Remote. And when you look at what they're setting up, anyone who is I have applied as an example for that process, because it just solves a lot of logistical problems where that funnel, it's not a Cayman Islands account, but it's a very open and legal Cayman Islands account, in the sense that you can just channel everything into Estonia. You can pay your tax in Estonia, and then it comes out the other end. Because it's an EU member country, it has tax relationships with everyone. I don't know if necessarily people want to talk about that kind of stuff, but I find it very interesting how they're literally building the future of that infrastructure. And I think you'll probably see Estonia they'll be making trillions in tax income off of that if they continue to succeed at what they're doing.
Oh yeah, I've got a very close eye on that whole process. I haven't applied myself because I'm an American living in the Netherlands, and I don't want to risk any sort of visa, anything, because I want to stay living here. So I was like, I'm not going to be their beta tester, but my eye is very closely on there. Okay, so we've got to wrap up, but I have two more questions. One is, what advice would you give to people who are just starting out or just looking for remote work, sort of newbie advice?
If you're an employer, build process documentation as quickly as humanly possible inside of the business. An on-premise business, you have what is called sort of, I'll call it kind of secret knowledge, probably a better word for it, but Suzanne knows how to open up the server in a particular way that no one knows how to do. And if you want to learn how to do that, you've got to get it from Suzanne. You need to take what's in Suzanne's head, pull it out, document it, process it, digitize it, and then put it on some type of platform for everyone to be able to get access to. Google Docs is a really fast, cheap, and quick option. Trainual is a fantastic paid option that we use quite a bit. And then if you actually want to just start, because building processes sounds like such a huge job, but last year, Dimitri, the CTO of GitLab, brought us through his GitLab company handbook. It's a Git repository of 3,200 pages outlining all of the processes inside of GitLab, everything that they do to manage their team of 500 remote employees. So if you want to know how to do a demo, you can find it in that repository. If you want to know what your stock distribution is as an employee, it's inside of that handbook. Just type in GitLab handbook. You should be able to find it. and he encourages you to steal all of those processes and use them for yourself. So you have everything that you possibly need right there. We originally had actually built our own processes to give away to people, and I don't even do it anymore because GitLab is just doing such a fantastic job. It's a open project, so anyone can be able to jump into all of the processes that GitLab has. Cannot recommend that enough. And then as an employee, go to Remote OK or We Work Remotely, and just check out the applications that are there. I mean, there's job postings that are happening all the time. And then when you get that job, really understand that it is more KPI driven than even inside of an on-premise company. So in an on-premise company, you can have, I'm going to use the same name, Suzanne. Suzanne can kind of be the office clown or the person that kind of holds everyone together. That doesn't really exist inside of a remote first company, or not to the same degree. If you're not hitting your KPIs, that's the only thing that really matters inside of a remote first company. So you need to very clearly identify those, and then have your team, make sure that you are accountable to that and that you're executing on those KPIs.
Love it. Excellent advice for both the employer and the employee. Love it. And I'm going to put Trainual in my list of tools. It sounds great.
Perfect.
Very last question, which is, if people want to learn more about you or get in touch either for Time Doctor, staff.com, or Running Remote Conference, what's the best place to find you?
So I think the best place is if you go check out YouTube, go to youtube.com/runningremote. That's where we're number one putting up all of our talks for free. So all of last year's talks are up there and you can check them out. I also do a whole bunch of videos on just subjects that I'm having troubles with regards to remote work. So if you write in a comment, I will get back to you within the next couple hours without any problem whatsoever. Outside of that, if you want to try out Time Doctor, just go to timedoctor.com and runningremote.com. That for me is my passion project. So if you are listening to this podcast and you're thinking, man, this is probably for you, just go and send an email through runningremote.com. We've got like those little email captures there, and you can ask any questions and we'll get back to you.
Awesome. So timedoctor.com, staff.com, runningremote.com, and then youtube.com/runningremote. I'll put everything in the show notes so everybody has easy access, but really good references. Liam, thank you so much for your time today. I'm very excited about what you're doing, very excited about your conference, and I'm really happy to have you on this show. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, until next time, be powerful.